In today's reading from the book of Acts, Peter is on trial. Peter, the rock on which Jesus would build his church, is being criticized by some of the leaders of that same church for spending some time with Cornelius, a Gentile, down in Caesarea. You've probably watched enough courtroom dramas on television to picture the scene. There's Peter on the witness stand, the judge sitting in his black robe, a jury box full of attentive jurors, and the prosecuting attorney pacing back and forth in front of the bench until he whirls and points at Peter and says, "Why? Why did you go to uncircumcised men and eat with them?" "Why?" Peter asks. "You want to know why?" And then he sighs and says, "It's a long story." It is a long story, even longer than the one Peter tells here in Acts 11. To get the whole story, you have to go all the way back to Genesis 12, to that place where God made his covenant with Abraham. Do you remember? God told Abraham to get up and go from his home in Haran to the place that God would show him. "If you do," God said, "I will give you a land and a people. I will make of you a mighty nation." And so Abraham got up and went down to the land of Canaan. He was 75 years old when he made the journey. He settled there and then moved from place to place, but years later, God still hadn't given him a land of his own. God still hadn't given him a child of his own. Abraham began to doubt the promises of God. And so God came to him one night in a dream, led him outside the tent, asked him to look up at the night sky to see if he could count all the stars that were there. "Of course not," Abraham said. "That's how many descendants you will someday have," God told him. "Trust me." And then God asked him to sacrifice some animals, to cut the carcasses in two, to lay the halves over against each other. And while Abraham watched in wonder, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between those pieces, signaling God's intention to keep his promise to Abraham, to honor his covenant. It was not long after that that God asked Abraham to signal his own intention to honor the covenant. He asked him to circumcise every male in his household. "This shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you," God said. Circumcision. The Bible doesn't tell us what Abraham said in reply, but I think I know what I would have said. "What? You want us to do what? With all due respect, Lord, don't you think a secret handshake would work just as well?" But Abraham was a better man than I am. He didn't object, didn't argue. He just did what the Lord told him to do. He circumcised his son Ishmael, and then all the male servants in his household, and finally, at the fragile age of 99, Abraham himself submitted to the ritual of circumcision. Ouch. It was a little easier from then on. Jewish males were circumcised 8 days after they were born, before they were old enough to see it coming or say no. But from the time of Abraham forward, this was the special identifying mark of God's people. It's what set them apart from all others in the ancient world. And here's the funny thing about being different. If you are different in what you think of as a good way, for example, if you are stronger than all the other boys or prettier than all the other girls, you can begin to think of yourself as not only different, but somehow better than all the others. And so if you're circumcised and you understand that as a sign of your special relationship with God, you can begin to look down on those who are not circumcised. Take a look sometime at how the word uncircumcised is used in the Old Testament. It begins as early as Genesis 17. Just after God has instructed Abraham to circumcise his household, he warns, any male who is uncircumcised shall be cut off from my people. He has broken my covenant. In Genesis 34, Dinah's brothers refused to let her marry Shechem, the Canaanite, because, as they say, we cannot give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. In Exodus 12, God says that the people can circumcise those aliens in their midst who want to participate in the Passover feast, but that no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. By the time we get to the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel, the word uncircumcised has become a kind of curse word. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, David says, that he should defy the army of the living God? As I said, when you're different in a way that you think of as a good way, you can begin to think that you are better than everybody else. God's people began to speak of themselves not only as circumcised, but also as special, clean, pure, righteous, holy. And they began to speak of the uncircumcised as common, dirty, impure, unrighteous, wicked. They began to separate themselves more and distinguish themselves not only by circumcision, but also by how they dressed, by what they ate, by their special holidays and religious observances. When God said in Leviticus 19:2, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy," they understood it to mean you shall be different, for I, the Lord your God, am different. They didn't want anyone to mistake them for uncircumcised Gentiles. Read through Leviticus chapters 17 through 26 sometime if you really want to get a feel for how far these distinctions can be carried. This is the part of the Old Testament known as the Holiness Code, and it describes in rich detail what the people of God will do that will make them different from all other people on earth. The things they will do to make them and keep them holy. And then imagine growing up in that kind of culture, where your circumcision, your side locks, your prayer shawl, your fringes are all a sign of how different and how special you are. And then imagine that God suddenly decides none of that matters anymore. Or perhaps God decides that all of it has come to matter too much. He pays a visit to Peter, who is staying at the home of Simon the tanner down in Joppa. It's noontime, and while lunch is being prepared, Peter goes up on the roof to pray. He gets hungry while he's up there. He falls into a trance, and in a vision he sees something like a large sheet being lowered down by its four corners. He looks inside and sees all the kind of food that a good Jewish boy is supposed to avoid. Suckling pigs, nice fat rabbits, shrimp and live lobster, everything prohibited by Leviticus chapter 11. But he hears a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter is horrified. Lord, I have never eaten anything profane or unclean. But the Lord's only answer is, don't call unclean what I have called clean. The whole thing happens 3 times for emphasis. And as soon as it's over, there's a knock on the door. Guess who's standing there? 3 uncircumcised Gentiles. for emphasis.